Good morning, everyone. My name is Matthew Glover. I'm with Media Services and Executive Council. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We are joined by President and CEO of SaskPower, Rupen Pandya, Premier Scott Moe, and Minister responsible for SaskPower, Don Morgan. Following the presentation, we're going to take a brief moment to bring in Justice Minister Bronwyn Eyre onto the stage before heading into questions. Mr. Pandya will remain in the room with us for questions, and whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Matthew. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's event. So we're here to talk to you about the potential federal regulations that will have a major impact on electricity in Saskatchewan. The federal government's proposed clean electricity regulations will see Canada's electricity sector legally required to achieve net zero GHG emissions by 2035. Prior to the proposed federal clean electricity regulations, SaskPower was working towards achieving the goal by 2050. This target was outlined in the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act, which was tabled in November of 2020 and was already a very aggressive timeline. The proposed clean electricity regulations moved that timeline up by 15 years from 2050 to 2035. This timeline is not feasible in Saskatchewan or likely in several other Canadian jurisdictions. SaskPower's mission is to provide reliable, sustainable, cost-effective power to the people of the province. As I mentioned, SaskPower is committed to the goal of achieving a net zero GHG electricity system. The challenge that we have is that logistically, financially, and technologically, the implications of transitioning our fossil fuel-based electricity generation system to net zero are unprecedented. Saskatchewan is one of the few provinces that does not have access to the needed commercially available technical solutions to achieve net zero GHG emissions by 2035. And unlike provinces rich in hydropower like Manitoba, British Columbia, and Quebec, we don't have the geographic benefit of being able to develop zero GHG emitting large-scale baseload hydro production. Logistically, even if the necessary non-emitting baseload technologies did exist and were commercially proven, it's not feasible for us to acquire the capital, material, and labor needed to transition over 150% of our generation system that took us 93 years to build in a short 12 years. Even if we introduce our first SMR, small modular reactor, by 2035, achieving net zero electricity system by 2035 in Saskatchewan is not possible. And beyond the challenges of having to rebuild over 150% of our generating capacity, the transition to net zero will require us to have a significant build out of new transmission lines, as well as modernizing our electricity grid, while at the same time sustaining the current power grid in the province of Saskatchewan. So the current capacity of SaskPower system is about 5,437 megawatts, which is comprised of about 65% thermal fossil fuel emitting generation and about 35% non-emitting sources. Renewable generation such as wind and solar doesn't produce electricity when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. And given the intermittency of renewables, about 80% of the energy consumed in Saskatchewan must come from reliable baseload sources that can provide power 24/7. And we are amongst Canadian jurisdictions, we have the longest path to travel with respect to decarbonizing electricity. We also have one of the largest grids per capita in North America. We have 157,000 kilometers of distribution and transmission lines that cover 652,000 square kilometers. We have 550,000 customers, and that gives us some of the lowest densities with respect to our customers per line kilometer. We have about 2.6 customers per kilometer of line. And what that means is that there are relatively few customers to bear the large cost of transitioning and maintaining our power system. Given the size of the province and what is one of the largest grids in North America, per capita electricity transition costs will have a much larger impact on Saskatchewan ratepayers than anywhere else in Canada. We already face electricity rate competitiveness challenges with low-cost non-emitting hydro jurisdictions, and this gap will only grow. Saskatchewan's population and economy are growing, and on the road to 2035, SaskPower will need to expand our electricity generating capacity by more than 7,000 megawatts. We'll build out the electricity grid and plan additional, and this will support building out additional economic growth and electrification of transportation and industrial processes, including heating. This expansion will have significant costs that will increase electricity rates for customers no matter how quickly we decarbonize the power system. And ensuring affordable and reliable electricity will be foundational for Saskatchewan to achieve long-term success, jobs, investment, and exports, including population growth. The requirement for net zero GHG electricity system by 2035 is not possible due to technological, logistical, and financial challenges, as I noted earlier. Our fundamental concern is that the CER, the Clean Electricity Regulations, are being drafted and implemented without fully considering the unique context and associated impacts of these regulations on each province. We have shared these challenges with senior officials in the federal government to help them understand Saskatchewan's unique situation. The role of natural gas generation beyond 2034 is necessary to ensure reliable power to back up intermittent renewables and transition to net zero electricity system. Natural gas generation will be required beyond 2034, and without access to natural gas generation to back up wind and solar to meet customer electricity demand, SaskPower will be unable to meet Saskatchewan's electricity needs in 2035. In fact, Ontario's electricity system operator has communicated that significant natural gas generation will remain in their system beyond 2034. They've just announced that they are building 8 new gas plants. The federal government has communicated to SaskPower that non-emitting hydro imported from Manitoba would allow SaskPower to achieve net zero by 2035. This is not accurate. Manitoba does not have surplus power to meet Saskatchewan's needs to reach net zero by 2035. Manitoba's grid is roughly comparable to ours. They have about 6,000 megawatts of capacity. Their load is about 5,000 megawatts, leaving about 1,000 megawatts remaining. About 290 of that is already being imported by SaskPower into the province of Saskatchewan, and then they have reserve margin requirements, which would leave them with insufficient power to respond to our capacity needs during the peak load times during the winter and the summer months. Beyond the technological and logistical impacts, the financial impact of achieving net zero electricity grid in Saskatchewan will significantly broaden the existing regional electricity rate gap between hydro generation rich and non-hydro generation rich provinces within our country. Even if we could technically achieve net zero by 2035, the cost would more than double the rate of power. These customers' rate pressures would make Saskatchewan less competitive than our neighbors in attracting business and growing our economy. Meanwhile, higher rates in Saskatchewan will be a significant stressor for low-income families, as well as those in remote and rural and Indigenous communities that rely on electricity for heat. Federal GHG emission regulations were first introduced in 2012 and have become increasingly more stringent. The 2012 regulations allowed all conventional coal units to operate for 50-year life. For instance, this allowed the coal-fired Shan power plant station to operate until 2042. In 2018, regulations evolved and were amended, requiring all conventional coal units to be retrofitted with CCS or phased out by 2030, irrespective of their remaining useful life. Regulations changed yet again with the carbon tax being implemented in 2019 at $20 per ton, increasing to $170 per ton by 2030. New regulations were introduced again in 2019, impacting natural gas generation emissions stringencies. And lastly, in 2022, development of the proposed clean electricity regulations began, and they will require the electricity sector to reach net zero GHG emissions by 2035, 15 years ahead of the federal government's prior commitment. The discussion paper that supports the clean electricity regulation contemplates near zero emissions in the 50 tons to 30 tons per gigawatt hour. Currently, a combined cycle natural gas plant generates about 370 tons of carbon per gigawatt hour, and so it's near zero performance that's required. In addition, it contemplates only operating natural gas in emergency circumstances and to meet peak load, which will be extremely challenging, if not impossible, for Saskatchewan to achieve. So the moving goalposts in the utility business, we have long lead times with respect to the development of new generating capacity. Just for example, it takes us about 8 years to design and construct a new gas plant. And given this evolving regulatory environment, it has been very difficult for our utility to plan forward in this context. Saskatchewan has been planning for a net zero GHG electricity system by 2050, and has already taken steps to decarbonize the electricity system. This includes adding almost 700 megawatts of capacity from sources such as wind, solar, and biomass. Meanwhile, we have plans to add another 600 megawatts of wind and another 400 megawatts of solar by 2027. As we look to further expand wind and solar generation, we'll continue to need natural gas generation to provide backup when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And as an example, SaskPower currently has 617 megawatts of wind generation, and on the hottest or coldest days of the year when demand for electricity is at its highest, there's often very little wind for days at a time with minimal electricity provided for wind generation. We had a period in December where there was no wind between Alberta and Saskatchewan, so across both prairie provinces for 7 days in a row. So as a result, natural gas generation is necessary to ensure reliability as we add renewables. Additionally, SaskPower continues to evaluate nuclear small modular reactors as a potential non-emitting baseload source of electricity that could be available as early as 2034. I'd like to stress that SaskPower's mission is to provide reliable, sustainable, cost-effective power to our province, and we will continue to do so. Looking ahead, we will require federal regulatory flexibility to ensure that we can continue to meet the electricity needs of our province. This includes more time to reach the net zero GHG target and significant funding necessary to ensure SaskPower can provide our customers and our province with sustainable electricity into the future. Thanks. I'll turn it over to you, Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Rupen. Folks, now you can see the impossible position that our province, Saskatchewan, and SaskPower have been put in as the federal government continues to move ahead with policies that quite simply are not based in reality. We're coming to a crossroads, and at stake is affordable and reliable power across the province. Right now, Canada has one of the cleanest electricity grids in the world. In Saskatchewan, Boundary Dam 3 has operated since 2014 and has captured more than 5 million tons of carbon dioxide. SaskPower now operates 10 natural gas power plants, including the $605 million Chinook station located in Swift Current, which began operations just recently in 2019. As well, next year, we are going to see the Great Plains Power Station in Moose Jaw, a $780 million investment will come into service. And SaskPower's emissions are coming down because of investments just like this. The investments, however, are not good enough to meet the federal government's net zero emissions grid by 2035. And we're expecting new regulations in that clean electricity standard that are so severe that Saskatchewan Power would not be able to operate any coal or natural gas power plant, even with the CCS technology that we currently have employed today. That means we would be faced with shutting down our Boundary Dam 3 facility. It means we would have to consider shutting down our natural gas plants, including the ones that we have just opened and the ones that have not even yet opened. And that begs the question to our province and to SaskPower is, where are we going to get our baseload electricity from? Wind and solar can supplement power production, but they can't provide baseload generation. This target does not contemplate the eventuality of not having enough baseload power to support our grid, thereby support our Saskatchewan families and industries that are employing those families. This target does not contemplate the extraordinary costs associated with meeting said targets. It provides us with an unreliable power supply alongside skyrocketing rates. Saskatchewan's plan is affordable and it's realistic. We will continue to invest over the course of the next decade to replace generation that has come to the end of its life and to grow our electricity production to keep pace with our economic as well as our population growth in the province. This investment will also help us to further reduce emissions by adding more renewable power, more technologies such as small modular reactors, a safe and reliable and affordable power system for Saskatchewan people while continuing to reduce our emissions profile. The plan being put forward today, Saskatchewan's plan, does just that. And so today, we are asking the federal government to support the Saskatchewan plan. We believe that the federal government can make a substantial contribution to affordable, reliable power that reduces emissions in this province by first, recognizing Saskatchewan's plan to achieve net zero by the year 2050. Second, by contributing to the cost of and emissions reduction in Saskatchewan's plan by providing SaskPower with grants for 75% of the cost of the first small modular reactor that will be built in Saskatchewan, 50% of the cost of new renewable and low-emission power sources that are being utilized in Saskatchewan. And under the Saskatchewan plan, the federal government would contribute then about $6 billion. The Saskatchewan people would be responsible for the remaining $28 billion. With that federal contribution, the Saskatchewan plan can hold annual rate increases to about 3%, which is in stark contrast, I would say, to the unaffordable plan by the federal government, which results in a total rate increase of 107% by the year 2035. The federal government can also increase affordability for SaskPower customers, thereby Saskatchewan residents, by freezing its carbon tax on electricity in Saskatchewan at its current rate of $65 per ton, rather than increasing it to $170 per ton or even beyond. This step alone would save SaskPower customers billions of dollars over the course of the next number of years. Finally, the Saskatchewan plan also means that we will consider running our fossil fuel generated electricity production and facilities to the end of their life. But it's a consideration that we will continue to evaluate as part of our commitment to keep electricity rates affordable and to protect the reliability of the Saskatchewan electricity grid. There's a pretty clear choice as the government of Saskatchewan and SaskPower move forward in making the decisions on the future of power production in our province. On the one hand, we have the federal plan that is unaffordable. It jeopardizes the reliability of our power system. It imposes unrealistic emission standards and timelines for our province, thereby making it unachievable. That plan would damage our economy as well, driving up the costs for Saskatchewan families and businesses by $45 billion and result in a doubling, at the very least, of our power rates by the year 2035. Simply because the federal government has continually desired to move those goalposts. Or we have the Saskatchewan plan, which will keep power rates affordable, will maintain and grow a safe and reliable power system in this province. It will keep reducing emissions and ultimately become net zero by the year 2050. And it will continue to grow our Saskatchewan economy. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be very clear about this. In Saskatchewan, we will not attempt the impossible when it comes to power production in our province. We will not risk plunging our homes, our schools, our hospitals, our special care homes, our businesses into the cold and darkness because of the ideological whims of others. We will not increase power costs for our businesses and our families to the point where they become completely unaffordable. If we were to do that, we wouldn't grow anything in Saskatchewan. We wouldn't move anything. We wouldn't go anywhere. And we'd get awful cold in a hurry. Saskatchewan must have affordable and reliable electricity available on demand. And under our watch, it most certainly is going to. We are choosing the Saskatchewan plan. And now I would say that the federal government has a choice as well. And let's hope they make the right one.
Thank you, Premier. Thank you, Mr. Pandya. We're just going to make a quick switch, and then we will move to questions. Thank you very much. Now we'll open up. We can start with Murray.
Question for Rupen. What is the maximum?
Check. Okay, great. Thanks for the question, Mary. So we currently import 290 megawatts of hydro capacity from Manitoba. We just recently signed another 20-year deal as part of that 290 megawatts. So we've talked to Manitoba about the possibility of importing more. But Manitoba, as their economy continues to grow, as they continue to see electrification more broadly, will require that power back. And so they've served notice that they'll likely take that power back from us. So, when I was laying out the maximum capacity of Manitoba's system and how much capacity that they have available to provide us, maybe there's another 100 or 200 megawatts of capacity there, but that's not sufficient to meet, of course, our peak load requirements in the winter or the summer.
I think there's been numerous conversations that have occurred at the federal government, both at the political level as well as at the industry level. As SaskPower has been in discussions with the federal government on numerous occasions as well at the workability, discussing the workability and the unachievability of this plan. And so the fact, and listen, this is not just Saskatchewan that I think is going to not be able to achieve a net zero by 2035. You'll find it largely unachievable across the nation of Canada as well. And what we are putting forward here today is a Saskatchewan plan which is realistic, it's affordable, and ultimately is going to provide us with the reliability in the baseload electricity that we require as we grow and prosper with the number of people as well as economically here in the province. And so those discussions have occurred through Minister Ryder, Minister Morgan, our Minister of Justice, myself at times, as well as at the industry level. And there was a discussion paper with respect to the net zero by 2035 and the clean electricity standards that was put out that there's been a discussion around as well. So it should be no surprise that one, it's unachievable in Saskatchewan as well as many other provinces, unaffordable in Saskatchewan as well as many other provinces, and what we put forward is most certainly an achievable, affordable alternative. I think you might want to speak to the fact that they've talked about the clean electricity regulations are not out yet, and we would say that today and throughout those discussions that we would truly hope that the federal government would take the guidance from many provinces on what actually is achievable and affordable for Canadian residents, and our concern being those residents in industries that are employing those residents in Saskatchewan. Minister Eyre?
Well, and for example, we've seen repeatedly, and certainly to the Premier's point, we, SaskPower, other ministers have spoken to the federal government on all of these issues, have written numerous times over numerous years. And we've seen next to no consultation on some of these key policies, the clean electricity regulations, the electric vehicle regulations, the cap on oil production. I know in the case of the oil caps paper, it was released, I think, 24 hours before everyone saw it, and so that was the consultation that the province has had. In other words, next to none. So I think certainly our position has been clear on these things for years. And 2035 is no secret. 2035 and the clean electricity regulations and what they're intended to achieve has been no secret. The federal government has mentioned 2035 clean electricity regulations, no fossil fuel generated power in the context of these regulations, in the context of the electric vehicles regulations, in the context of oil caps. It is in black and white, absolutely been clear that is their goal, and that's how they're going to achieve them.
There has to be a growing realization on the part of the federal government that this is not just impossible for the province of Saskatchewan, but for other jurisdictions as well. Ontario was over 90% hydro and nuclear. They've recently announced that they're planning to build a number of natural gas plants, and they've said over the last number of months that it is impossible for them to meet the timelines or the targets that are there. So I'm thinking that with the other provinces raising it, and other ones are in the same position that we are, but to a lesser extent, they have to come to grips with and saying, okay, Canadians are not ready for this. Canadians will need to have a different timeline and different things to maintain security of supply and affordability.
We'll go to Adam and then Brian.
Yeah, so, well, we've just, we have a significant number of natural gas resources across the western part of the province, but our newest natural gas assets would be the Chinook gas plant that just went into production. Great Plains is going to come online in 2024, and there's a third natural gas plant called Aspen that's going to be built in the Lanigan area that will come online in 2027. And so those assets will run out 45 years or more, depending on their operating circumstances. I think I just mentioned Aspen as well. What I would note is that the clean electricity regulations will require, of course, the coal regulations require the end of unabated coal. So coal assets will have to be closed in 2030. And there's two particular impacts. One is BD3, which is our carbon capture facility. So that facility has an end of life of 2044. But under this proposed CER, regulations would likely have to end life in 2035. And then there's the Shan Power Station, which of course has a 2042 end of life and would have to end life in 2030 based on the current coal regulations.
So what you're saying is that those, even the current assets will continue running past 2030?
I can likely answer that. What we're saying today, that as per the Constitution, how we generate power in the province of Saskatchewan, or any province across Canada for that matter, is the purview and the jurisdiction of the province. Those are decisions that ultimately the province makes, not the federal government. And those are decisions that we will work on in, for example, our coal-fired plants as to whether they would continue to utilize coal in a post-2030 world, or whether we would look at converting those to gas in a post-2030 world. That's a decision that has not yet been made, but it is the purview of the province as to whether or not SaskPower would have that opportunity to do either of those, and we're saying that we do have the opportunity to do either of those. Listen, the clean electricity standards are based in three principles. One is the greening of the grid, or the reduction of emissions, and the federal government has interpreted that as a net zero by 2035 target, which is not achievable. Even if we took all of the financial challenges off the table, of which we can't, still not achievable in this province and a number of other provinces. And so we agree with the greening of the grid, the reduction of emissions. In fact, our target is net zero by 2050, so not that much different. The other two parameters of the clean electricity standards are to keep power rates affordable and to not sacrifice the reliability of the baseload in the power system. We won't sacrifice the reliability and the affordability of Saskatchewan's power grid to meet some notional target that is not achievable, the net zero target by 2035. And so we do reserve the right provincially to choose how we are going to produce that power, whether it's natural gas, whether it's a coal-fired power production with or without CCS. What we are interested in is running those assets to the end of their life, which is 2042 and ultimately 2044 with BD3. That's the most efficient and affordable way to provide powers. That is what they were designed to do, and we made those investments. SaskPower, on behalf of its customers, made those investments in those facilities with a full expectation of utilizing those investments until the end of their life. Now, a number of coal-fired facilities have found their way to the end of life prior to 2030, and that is why you're seeing the outbuild and replacement of those facilities with Chinook, with the gas plant in Moose Jaw, as well as Aspen, or some might call it Wolverine, up in the eastern side of our province. And so you're seeing the replacement in a responsible manner of those coal-fired facilities that have found their way to the end of their asset life. This is the most efficient and affordable way to operate any power system, including the one in Saskatchewan.
We'll go to Adam and then Brian.
The Minister of Environment was interviewed this morning, and he said that the government hasn't seen the regulations yet, and there will be mechanisms built in. And he also said that the federal government's not going to let the lights go off. What's your confidence level that there can be some negotiation here with some of these end of life, with keeping natural gas going and even BD3 going? Do you think that's...
Well, at the end of the day, it's within the provincial jurisdiction on how we ultimately produce that power, and the federal Minister of Environment should and will understand that, and that's why we are communicating that through our Minister of Justice, as well as communicating our financial asks for, and the opportunity for the federal government to participate in, yes, the greening of our grid, the reduction of emissions, but in a responsible manner that provides affordable and and reliable power for Saskatchewan people and ultimately the industries across the province that are here today and coming that employ Saskatchewan people. And so what we would say is, as you formulate, Mr. Minister, your clean electricity standards, yes, certainly consult with all of the provinces, as you should. Make sure that they are realistic. Make sure they are not impacting to a negative degree the affordability or reliability of our systems. And, have a close look at the plan that we have ultimately put forward and that we are going to follow in the province of Saskatchewan. It may differ a little bit from province to province across the nation, as we have variable methods in which we generate electricity. But most certainly, I think there is an opportunity for ourselves and other provinces to work with the federal government on continuously reducing emissions in our grid, but not sacrificing the affordability and reliability of the grid. If we were to go just blindly to the net zero by 2035 plan, I mean, one, we couldn't achieve it. That's been laid out. Two, it would cost us an additional $20 billion for an electricity grid that would be entirely unreliable in the province. And so unachievable, unaffordable, and ultimately unreliable.
For a sit down to clarify parameters then. Maybe you are.
Yeah. We'll go to Brian in the back and then we'll come to that, Murray. He's been waiting, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I'm concerned that you're not actually building enough, because your presentation, it says 65% of the power is fossil fuels, but in fact, this winter, we've had many days where it's 84%. Every F-150 Lightning that Ford sells requires the power generation of a house, including the grid support. And the federal government budget this year said we're going to need to increase the grid by 2.2 to 3.4 times by 2050. So the coal plants, or the natural gas plants we're building right now may be enough to replace the coal plants, but it won't be enough to do that and back up the wind for the days like on Friday when Alberta's 3,600 megawatts of wind produced too.
Yeah, and just to touch on Murray's question, we're always open to sitting down with the federal government. They're more than welcome to come here at any point in time. I actually have inquired with the Prime Minister the last time he came, and he was, we weren't able to make that work. To this question, you're correct, and what Rupen Pandya had put out in the outset was, of our generation capacity, 65% comes from natural gas and coal, from fossil fuels. But of our actual usage, and I think he mentioned this in his notes, about 80% roughly on average is coming from those very same fossil fuels. That is largely in this province and many other provinces producing, or is the production of our baseload electricity. And so that is what we cannot sacrifice at this point in time. We will need time to look at, how we transition to other baseload generational methods that we have, and we don't have a lot in Saskatchewan. It's quite likely going to be in the nuclear sphere. We're maximizing our hydro opportunities, maximizing many of our other baseload opportunities, looking at, but in its infancy, some of the battery opportunities are around renewables. But ultimately, at the end of the day, that 80% baseload power that is currently coming from natural gas and coal is going to have to continue to come from quite likely those sources for the foreseeable future.
Are you looking at any more additional carbon capture? US EPA last week basically proposed that all coal plants and natural gas plants by 2038 have to have carbon capture installed or possibly shut down. So are we looking at B6, Shannon, or even Aspen and Chinook?
Well, and Don, you may have a comment on this, but we do have the only operating carbon capture and storage, and ultimately using that carbon in enhanced oil recovery in the Weyburn-Midale field, of which you're very familiar with, Brian. But we do have one operating carbon capture and storage facility there now on BD3, and I think what we're stating today is we're quite likely going to operate that at least as long as 2035, and would reserve the opportunity to even operate that particular facility beyond that. When I looked at the EPA paper that came out, I believe, just last week, it very closely aligned actually with what the Saskatchewan plan is here today. In fact, in that very papers, and I can't remember the page number, 56 or so, it actually references BD3 It references BD3 and the carbon capture and storage facility that we have operating here in Saskatchewan as one of the potential opportunities for coal-fired power plants to continue to operate in the U.S. and then actually utilizing that carbon capture potentially on natural gas plants down the way. All of that is good. I think all of that, in fairness, that SaskPower would continuously be looking at. But under the guise of ensuring that the power that we're providing is reliable and affordable here in this province. Ultimately, it needs to remain affordable for Saskatchewan families across the province, in particular those in the north that are heating their homes with electricity quite often, if not virtually 100% of the time. It needs to be affordable for the industries that are operating here today and the industries that are arriving here, as that ultimately is where our employment comes from. At the end of the day, we are an export-driven province. That's how we create our wealth, and we need to be competitive with our electricity rates. We also need to be having those conversations and satisfying industry needs when it comes to lowering our emissions profile in our how we produce our electricity here in the province. We're committed to doing that. Simply committed to finding that net zero number by 2050 rather than 2035. Anything to add, Don? And then we'll go to
Yeah,
Mark.
in Alberta, they had largely a coal fleet, which they've almost completely converted to natural gas. Some of the facilities that they're doing, they're working on doing carbon capture on the natural gas facility. SaskPower is watching that very closely, but they're likely a year or two out. It's new technology. It may come to pass. We've asked them to focus on our facilities in Saskatchewan to make sure they would be ready to have carbon capture added to them if at some point in time that becomes a viable option. But right now, nobody's doing it. You're likely aware in Alberta there's the Genesee one that's underway right now as a pilot. So hopefully that works. To your point, it will be a huge challenge if the federal government mandates that we will take natural gas out of our homes for a heating source. It is physically impossible to try and even consider that. We see the high cost of electric heat in northern Saskatchewan. Natural gas isn't available, but if we try to do that in our larger centers here, it is a frightening prospect.
Just to clarify, has this plan been formally communicated to the federal government at this point? Are you intending to do that, and are you intending to ask for a sit-down with the significant business?
Certainly, Minister Eyre will speak to maybe the letter that you sent, but there's also been a letter sent to the Deputy Prime Minister from our Deputy Premier. Both serve as their ministers of finance on some of the financial asks that would be required for us to move forward with the affordable, reliable Saskatchewan plan, as well as some other financial asks in the province as well. And so that letter is on its way. That communication is on its way. With respect to sitting down, and Jim, you may have a comment on this as well, and Minister Eyre may, as I think it's included in her letter as well. Many of the opportunities that have been offered to sit down and discuss, some of the funding, to discuss some of the input that provinces would be able to provide, have been centered around roundtables that are linked then to just transition and whatnot. And the province of Saskatchewan is not interested in the just transition program that the federal government has been discussing. And so those aren't opportunities for real consultation about what is a realistic plan like this plan right here. And so the consultations have occurred at the industry level, at the political level, and there are points of correspondence that are on their way, actually probably arrived this morning to the federal government on the financial aspects of this, on what this is, but also some of the legal aspects that Minister Eyre will speak to.
So, yes, a letter went out this morning, one, as Premier mentioned, from the Deputy Premier on the financial roll-up in terms of concerns, ongoing files we have that are not, outstanding. On my end to Minister Wilkinson, outlining concerns really on the part of Saskatchewan about key policies. And obviously, we've talked about a number of them, clean electricity regulations being one, a just transition, the cap on oil, and other ones that have been outlined really to the federal government on our part for years. And I think that has to be really recognized that this isn't new in terms of either the federal government's unilateral mandates that they impose suddenly and often without any warning at all, and our response. That's been going on for a number of years, as I say. So the letter this morning that is going out will outline why we have the concerns we have over what specific policies. And I guess our concern going forward about participating in advancing policies with the federal government that will harm us. So, regional tables is one where regional table sounds benign, but they're tied to just transition. And as we know, just transition, 13% of the industrial workforce could be impacted, 3 million jobs. That affects us. That creates economic harm for the province. And there are others. So nothing precludes bilateral conversations with ministers, between government, between SaskPower and officials in Ottawa. That goes on and has always gone on. And we see that and undertake to do that all the time. But as for this should be no surprise. We've been very clear about the impacts of the clean electricity regulations and other policies.
And we view this as an opportunity, actually, for the federal government to, work alongside the government of Saskatchewan and SaskPower in providing that reliable, affordable electricity grid in our province that is continuing to reduce its emissions. It is an opportunity, but we're not going to participate in those discussions when they're precluded and under the scope of for example, a just transition lens. We are going to work with the federal government as equals, quite frankly, and in this space, it is provincial jurisdiction. On working together on how we can ensure that in Canadians, and in this case Saskatchewan residents, do have that affordable, reliable electricity grid now and into the future. We're a growing and vibrant province. Rupen had put up the slide, looking at our electricity needs into the future. And they're substantial because of a larger economy that will be here in 2035, because of a larger population that will be here in 2035. And so we need to plan for that, and we need to also protect it by ensuring the reliability and affordability of the grid.
Go to Brian and then Allison.
Premier, what happens if the federal government says no dice, we must shut down our power plants by 2035, and the Supreme Court backs it? What do we do then?
Well, you will talk, Bronwyn, our Minister Era will speak to some of the legalities on it, but most certainly this, and I'm not going to answer hypotheticals with respect to this, but it's our interpretation that these decisions on how you produce power most certainly are in the realm of provincial jurisdiction. Now, if you compare that to the carbon taxation policy, of which there was a commitment made that would not go above $50. So here we are today at $65, heading for $170, potentially now ideas floated of $240 plus. That Supreme Court decision in that case was very narrow with respect to applying a backstop where provinces wouldn't. We took that to the Supreme Court of Canada. Most certainly when it comes to clean electricity regulations and how you generate power, that isn't within the provincial jurisdiction, and Minister Eyre might speak a little more to that.
Well, and again, I think also key to the letter and the message that we're really putting forward now more than ever, to the federal government is that where there are those direct infringements on the province's constitution, constitutional jurisdiction, it really is time to make that clear that over and over again, including most recently with the clean electricity regulations, we see an absolute infringement of provincial jurisdiction over power generation and over natural resources. Keep in mind too, you speak of the Supreme Court, Brian, and it is interesting, in the carbon tax decision, the Chief Justice said that federalism recognizes that provinces have the autonomy to develop their economies as they see fit, and that the Constitution can't upset the balance and deprive provinces of the powers that are essential to their ability to control their cultural and economic destinies. That's in the carbon tax decision. And there's nothing in the carbon tax decision that says that the federal government has carte blanche to continue to trump provincial jurisdiction, as we're seeing with the clean electricity regulations, the oil cap, and on and on. So I think it's extremely important that when we talk about, any Supreme Court or legal context, the carbon tax decision was very clear. We have the right to forge our economic destiny. No one has told us otherwise. And so this is an important step today to that end. And that's what we've told the federal government and will continue to tell the federal government. And if it comes to legal challenges, that will be Saskatchewan's position. We have strong arguments around interjurisdictional immunity, around 92A, around words that have been said about our own rights to defend ourselves economically and culturally. So we're pretty confident that one of these days there has to be a recognition that federalism means something and provinces have jurisdiction.
I just add to that, Brian. This is not exclusively a Saskatchewan challenge as well. We see Ontario is 94% of the way to a net zero grid today. But they have, as was mentioned, are bringing on 10 natural gas-fired electrical generation facilities as we speak, or recently. And so not even the province of Ontario, to my understanding, is going to be able to achieve the net zero by 2035. So your question is not a Saskatchewan-specific question, and I would say therein lies the opportunity for the federal government today and as we move forward to engage with the provinces on, what is affordable, what is realistic, and what is ultimately reducing the emissions in our grid over a period of time for all Canadians, not just those in Saskatchewan. And so the opportunity, I would say, lies with the federal government, and we would hope that they take that. This is not about a standoff in any way, and I doubt whether, who knows, if this would end up in a court of law. This is actually about this province and I think others. Ontario, there's other coal-fired power plants that are generating electricity in Canada today that also have a runway to their end of life out to 2040, for example. And so this is an opportunity, I think, for us as Canadians to actually work together with our federal government on that affordable, reliable electricity supply across Canada, but that includes Saskatchewan.
You alluded to nuclear. SaskPower's current timeline says final decision will be made in 2029. Are you committing now that we are going nuclear one way or another?
I don't think we'd commit today going one way or the other. Most certainly it's about, I'm not aware of another option that can provide us that 80% baseload power over time that you had alluded to in a previous question that we ultimately will require. There might be some technologies that come on that chip away at the edges, maybe some access to affordable battery power to coincide with some renewables. But I'm not aware of another technology that we have access to in Saskatchewan that ultimately could provide that 80% baseload power to ensure affordable power, to ensure that our homes in northern Saskatchewan are still heated with electrical heat and they can afford the power bills that are coming at the end of the month. Affordable power to ensure that the industries, the potash mining industry, the uranium mining industry, the forestry industry, the coming rare earth industry, our agriculture industry can ultimately afford the electricity that they require to continue to conduct business here and ultimately continue to employ people in community after community. And so at this point, and I don't know, Rupen or Don, if you have another comment on other sources, but we have the hydro resources that we have are being utilized. We have the fossil fuels that we're utilizing today. Nuclear most certainly is one of the very strong considerations as we move ahead. And I'm not aware of another power source that we could be looking at, unless you've found one, Don.
In my 1,000 questions, I haven't found one, but in any event, we have asked SaskPower to look at every possible combination or every possible thing that's coming up. We've asked them to look at hydro. Well, hydro, we may be able to improve the efficiency, but we're talking in single percentage points. But nuclear has worked well, effectively, safely, reliably, and affordably in other provinces for 60 years. So it's certainly an option that can and should be considered. It's expensive to add to our current mix, but the timelines that are outlined in the regulatory process, there's been no willingness on the part of the federal government to bridge or change those. So the timeline to make that decision is 2029. And what I would ask people to do is wait and see what that happens. If they've got comments they want to make on it, would welcome them.
We'll go Go to
In the meantime, I think what we're saying as well is we're willing to work with the federal government, and we're going to have to utilize fossil fuels for the foreseeable future. On a second note on the nuclear conversation is all Canadian uranium comes from this province. Comes from the northern areas of this province, employing between 45 and 50% northern and Indigenous folks. You know, some of the most sustainable fuel that you can find to create electricity, and most certainly some of the most ethically produced fuel that you can find. And I've talked to a number of folks this week as we have discussions on some of the challenges that we have with forest fires in the northern parts of our province as to, you know, how we work through that immediate challenge, but the importance of supporting the uranium industry in Saskatchewan moving forward, not only to our benefit, but I would say to the benefit of all of our allies and trading partners around the world.
Okay, we'll go to Allison, and then we'll have time for Adam and Lisa.
I'm just wondering, probably for Rupen, where the 107% rate increase is coming from. I know the Premier said in the past it could be upwards of 4 times higher. I've talked to other experts who say that it's worse than that. So how accurate is that 1%?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, you know, the system planners in SaskPower who are looking at the question of what the, what the energy transition will require are factoring in, the Premier made a very important comment, and I'll maybe just respond to that really quickly. And he said it's not possible. So right now, the scenario where the power rates go up by 107% is predicated on a scenario that can't actually happen. We don't have carbon capture on natural gas yet. It won't be proven until 2027 or earliest in Alberta. And certainly we can't deploy nuclear until 2034, our first nuclear. And if we go the route, it will be 300 megawatts. So it's practically not possible for us to do it. But if it were, if you could build multiple reactors, if you could build carbon capture and it would work at the capture rates that the federal government has outlined in the discussion paper on the CER, that would generate costs in the neighborhood of about $45 billion. And when you take that cost and disperse across the rate base, it's 107%. Does that answer?
And I would just add to that, alongside this is an ask of the federal government, and we would hope that there is, a receptiveness to the participation financially of the federal government. I think I had said the federal government, we've asked for about a $6 billion participation. The people of Saskatchewan, the ratepayers, would then invest through rates about $28 billion in this reliable, affordable Saskatchewan plan. So we would look for that federal participation first and foremost. And we're not looking for participation in roundtables or regional tables that are precluded by discussing a federal policy like just transition. We're not participating in that type of a discussion that's going to remove jobs and opportunity for Saskatchewan people. Volkswagen didn't participate in regional and roundtables, and they were able to commandeer about $13 billion of direct investment from the federal government. And so we don't think that participation in securing the jobs of all of the industries that are currently employing people, industries that are providing food security and energy security to our allies and to over 150 countries around the world, industries that are growing in investment and jobs today and into the future. We think that investment, that $6 billion investment, most certainly is justified when you look and compare to an investment like Volkswagen, and doesn't require those regional roundtable discussions like Volkswagen didn't either. Secondarily to that, we would say, there's a number of provinces that collect equalization payments each and every year in this nation. Many of those provinces have the luxury and the good fortune of having hydropower facilities in their provincial jurisdiction, and ultimately those revenues generated from those facilities are excluded from the equalization formula. And so, for example, our neighbor to the east of us receives $2-3 billion a year in equalization. That would pale in comparison. Our investment, our asked investment in securing the reliable, affordable, lower emission power supply into the future on behalf of all of the families in Saskatchewan and all of the jobs in the industries that are operating in Saskatchewan, I think is a small but extremely valuable investment that the federal government, quite frankly, I think has an opportunity to consider now.
Go to Lisa.
Given that this is a net zero by 2035 plan, was there any thought given to
I think we've looked at every possibility and will continue to do that with regard to mitigation and abatement. We know that carbon capture on natural gas is a technology that's in its infancy, would certainly be a possibility. We know that everywhere that we've looked at, we will continue to explore options, but there is not a lot of options that are readily available. Not saying that we're not looking and won't look. I don't know whether, Rupen, you want to add anything to that or not. But we have looked at every kind of renewable power. We have looked at every kind of abatement, and some of them are interesting and exciting. Most of them are technologies that are relatively new, and hopefully 5-10 years from now, they may provide some assistance.
The last question, we'll go to Adam.
I was just gonna say, SaskPower is committed to decarbonizing electricity. I think I said that 10 months ago when I started on the job, and certainly the minister's correct. We're looking at every option. On the mitigation front, we're looking at demand-side management programming to have people use less power so that you can manage this. Maybe there's some 300 megawatts of availability there that we can identify. But given the scale of the challenge that we have before us, there is no readily available mitigation that you could put in place that would offset the requirement.
The federal government forward some bail changes. I know the Premier's been asking for that. Maybe yourself or the Justice Minister can weigh in on what you think of that. Whether they go far enough, and will they make Canadians safer?
Well, we have, following on the letter, as you referenced, that the Premier sent, the Justice Minister, the federal government has made some changes. I understand the bill is coming forward. I haven't seen everything that's in it. Have a certain sense, though, that the premiers and the provinces were listened to. We met as justice ministers a couple of months ago to that end, really to ask of the federal government that there be a look at bail reform. And the federal justice minister at that point undertook to do that. And we're now seeing some of the changes. The province had asked for reverse onus in the case of violent repeat offenders with a weapon. My understanding is that there are some moves in that direction. We also put forward pretty specific amendment proposals to the criminal code around community safety being taken into account. We'll be looking for that. And as you know, we also changed the directive in Saskatchewan for prosecutors to take into account that they must take into account whether there's been repeat violent offending when considering bail. So we'll see what's in there. We met, the Premier and I and the Minister of Corrections yesterday with chiefs of police. Certainly there's concern on the ground about what they are seeing and what's needed. And very clearly there's been an increase, exponential increase, in releases on bail following Bill C-75, which came in 2019. A federal bill which was based around the principle of restraint, release in every possible circumstance with the fewest constraints. That has had an enormous impact. And as police chiefs mentioned to us yesterday, and as they have across the country, we've seen too many tragedies where repeat violent offenders have been released and then gone on to certainly repeat violent offense. So we'll see what's in the federal bill, but we are hopeful that the federal government listened and that Minister Lametti and his government are responding to what they're seeing on the ground, what they're hearing from chiefs of police across the country, and what they're hearing from provinces.
Okay, given the time, we'll close. If you do have any questions else, let us know, but we will let everyone go. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good day.